So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience with trying out this new thing, which has been cross-discipline or interdisciplinary service learning collaborations. And I just wanted to start with a quick little bit of background on myself in case we haven't met. So again, I am Amber Rock. I'm a freshwater ecologist, and I have this passion for using science in a way that benefits local communities. Um, and that really got started when I was an undergraduate. Um, I was involved with a group on my undergraduate campus called the Clean Water Institute, and we went around and sampled different freshwater ecosystems and collected data on water quality. And then my mentor worked with local community groups and watershed conservation groups and things like that to help them use the data to apply for, protected status for different streams and for other things like that. We as students got to go to meetings with some of these groups for things like Trout Unlimited. And so I really kind of got to see how, even as an undergraduate, I was collecting data that was directly benefiting, these communities and these ecosystems. And I thought that was really cool. It kind of helped to put some of the things we do into context, I guess, or into, that sort of um, community mindset. And then when I was in graduate school, I unfortunately wasn't able to be directly involved in any sort of community work like this, but we did have on campus the Butler County Stream Team, which did some similar work where volunteers would go and collect samples and bring them back to campus, and we would, or the lab technicians would run those samples and give the water quality data to the county. Um, so my work was more related on freshwater food webs um, and freshwater organisms, but I kept my sort of interest in these community connections throughout grad school. And then when I got here, I of course hooked up with the Office for Community and Civic Engagement and started working on service learning projects, and that's how I got involved in these community connections. So I also want to put out a quick disclaimer that I am in no way an expert on any of this. This is just what I've been trying and how it's been going. So it's been an adventure, as you will see, but it's also been really cool. And so I don't want this to feel like a super formal sort of presentation. Feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point. Um, And then, at the end, I just kind of I'll throw out a few questions for a little bit of discussion if you're interested. So, but what I'm going to do next is kind of tell you a story, I guess, tell the story of this project and how it came to be and all of the different forms it has taken through the past few years, and then where we are today and sort of what I've learned from all of these twists and turns. And then again, sort of want to think about and maybe discuss the usefulness of these sorts of collaborations and how we can do more of it, hopefully. So this collaboration really got started in the fall, or at least the ideas got started in the fall of 2019 when Dr. Tamara Savage, who at that time was in the Department of Social Work, came to me with this idea to develop this sort of long-term collaboration between biology and social work and we were going to be investigating a local environmental justice issue. And so that again, the overall goal here was not only to have students do research and collect information on this issue, but to bring social work and biology majors together so that they could sort of understand these different perspectives on these big issues, and understand, like, for example, the science majors could understand how, the human aspects of these issues are also very important. Um, and then our social work students could get just more experience working with data and, understanding how sort of the scientific process works when we're investigating issues such as pollution and human health and things like that. So our project officially began in the spring of 2020, which was, of course, a great semester to try anything new. But we persevered. So the two classes that were specifically involved are here, the Understanding Social Research class, and then my class about pollution ecology. And in our original sort of inception of this project, we focused on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And that was an issue that in 2020 was very current and would potentially have very deep impacts on the local community. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, just to kind of explain why we chose it. This would have been a pipeline to move natural gas from West Virginia down along the East Coast. It was going to be 600 miles long, 42 million cubic meters of daily capacity, so just moving tons and tons of natural gas. And the reason we were so interested in it was because the terminus, or the end of the pipeline, was slated for Prospect, just down the street. And this would have caused a lot of, changes in the landscape, a lot of, cutting down forests and putting in infrastructure, and a lot of, potential pollution as well that comes along with any sort of project like this. It was a partnership between Duke Energy, Dominion Energy, Piedmont Natural Gas, and Southern Company Gas. So there were a lot of companies coming together on this. And so with this project, there were, of course, some very significant environmental justice concerns. And if you're not familiar with the concept of environmental justice, basically it's the idea that polluting industries tend to be placed in areas where there are a lot of poverty or a lot of minority populations, basically people that have less sort of political power and political capital to fight against having all of these polluting industries in their communities. And so along those lines, environmental decision making has historically excluded these populations, these communities. They don't have a voice. And so when the Atlantic Coast Pipeline came through, it was unfortunately more of the same. The environmental impact statement that was created claimed that there were no environmental justice concerns at all with this pipeline, and that there would be no disproportionate impact to Native American tribes, despite the path of the pipeline going through, Robeson County, which has, of course, a high population of Lumbee. But because the Lumbee, and this is where I get a little fuzzy on all of the legality of it, but because the Lumbee tribe is not federally recognized, they don't technically have to be included in any of these discussions, and so it gets pretty challenging. But then Dr. Ryan Emanuel wrote a letter to Science, basically explaining how the environmental justice analyses that had been done were flawed. And so we used this as sort of one of the areas that we were looking into for this project. And then our overall goals, we worked with a community group that had come together called Eco Robeson. They were trying to work to, oppose this pipeline. And what we were going to do with them was use our students as basically knowledge generators for the community. So they were going to research information about potential impacts of the ACP. We were going to look at various perspectives from different community members and different stakeholders. We were going to look into the social media and community activism angles, and sort of create a website with this information so that interested community members could check it out. And so to accomplish that goal, in my class, students were going to be split into groups to research a topic. And some of the sort of course goals that we included here was learning to evaluate sources for bias, because anytime you're doing work on politically charged topics, there's obviously the potential for bias. And also, learning that they need to verify information from multiple sources before they present it as, facts. And then their goal was to take the information from their topic to write a report for a non-scientist audience, for the general public. And then those reports would be added to the website content. In the social work course, they were going to conduct qualitative research. So they were going to interview people, learn how to code those interviews, and how to extract, patterns and things like that from interviews. And then each group was going to write a paper based on that topic in that interview. And then that would also be added to the website. And ideally, we were going to address multiple perspectives on this issue. The plan was to try to get, not only community members who are being impacted, but maybe somebody from local government, and maybe someone even from one of the companies for the ACP, to try to get the full scope of this issue. And then to actually bring the students together, I'll give a little bit of a spoiler for later. This was the most challenging part of the project, because due to various reasons, we could not get the two classes scheduled at the same time. So we did have a field trip to the proposed terminus site, and a local community activist met us there, Reverend Mac Ledgerton, to discuss the potential impacts and how the community would be affected. So we did this on Saturday as sort of a joint field trip for both classes. We also had Dr. Savage and I visited each other's classes to introduce ourselves and talk about what we were doing. We actually had some graduate student TAs that were super helpful, and they would come to both classes and help, explain what the other class was doing and answer questions and help create assignments, and things like that. The classes also peer reviewed each other's work, each other's reports towards the end of the semester. And then not only did they provide the review, but they also provided a reflection on sort of what they learned about this issue from the other classes' work. Other things we did throughout the semester is we had guest speakers, and we had both classes watch the short documentary Robinson Rises, which I would highly recommend if you haven't seen it. It's about 20 minutes long, and it's about this local sort of grassroots efforts to oppose the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Our guest speakers for the semester included Dr. Ryan Emanuel, Robbie Goins, and Jordan Rebels from Eco Robinson, Jeff Curry, who is our Lumber River keeper. So his work, he works with a different organization, but his work is all about conservation of the Lumber River and its watershed. And then, of course, the Reverend Mac Ledgerton. And then, of course, as we all know, COVID-19 happened. That pandemic happened in that spring semester. So, of course, this made completing the project more challenging, issues with technology. The social work students couldn't complete their interviews. They could, but they had to move them online, which sort of was less exciting for them. In my class, students really struggled with the transition to trying to do group work online. It was pretty new to them. And we were only able to get one of the proposed 3 field trips in before the pandemic. So only a few students actually got to have that experience, unfortunately. However, at the end of the semester, we were still able to have the students do the research, write the reports, do the peer reviews. So we were still able to complete most of our goals that semester. So then, in a surprise to everyone, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline project was canceled in the summer of 2020. This was a huge, victory for these groups that had been working in opposition, and it was largely canceled because of mounting legal costs to fight all of these different groups that were, bringing lawsuits against it. So that was really, really great. But then we needed to find a new project for our class. So for this collaboration, so we switched to focusing on something called concentrated animal feeding operations or factory farms. These are incredibly common in North Carolina. And they are a major polluting industry here in North Carolina. This first map is of all of the hog CAFOs in the orange dots in the state of North Carolina, and then beef is in blue. We don't have a lot of those. And again, if you're not quite familiar with a CAFO, this is where, those giant barns where they keep hundreds of pigs or thousands of chickens, and raise them in these really tightly confined conditions to create just lots and lots and lots of meat for human consumption. Now, the interesting thing is that another group has put together a different map of CAFOs in North Carolina. On this map, the pink are the hog CAFOs, the purple are the beef, and the green are poultry, mostly chicken. And poultry operations in the state of North Carolina are not very regulated at all, to the point where this first map is the official map from, I believe it's from DEQ, and the second map is from a local sort of conservation organization. So we don't even necessarily know where all of the chicken and poultry CAFOs are in this state, and they're not very heavily regulated. So of course that creates big concerns for pollution. So we thought this was a great next step. And so in the fall of 2020, the social work class, that class met every semester. So those students were really interested in sort of trying this out. And Tamara had a fully online class, was able to get some guest speakers. She started out the semester with having the students watch the Dirty Birds documentary about chicken CAFOs. That ended up, in retrospect, being a bit of a mistake, because then the students became really narrowly focused on animal rights issues for the rest of the semester, which is of course really important, but that wasn't really our goal. That's not what we wanted students to focus on. And they also struggled a little bit with some of the, I have separating opinion from fact, but the language that gets a little heated and out of control and things like that. So that semester was a learning experience. So then in the spring of 2021, we changed our community partner. Not that Eco Robeson did anything wrong, but after after the Atlantic Coast Pipeline project was dropped, they were sort of shifting their goals, and we were shifting ours. So we changed our community partner. And then again, we had this focus on swine and poultry CAFOs, but we intentionally focused it on policy and solutions. So that's what we wanted students to focus on. So we actually pre-selected topics for the students to choose from instead of letting students choose their own topics to research. And we also had groups from each class work on the same topic. So we had a social work group and a biology group that were both investigating, for example, human health impacts from CAFOs. And then again, we were able to have some TAs that facilitated interactions between classes. The TA created a Google Drive folder where, even though our classes met at different times, students could sort of interact online through Google Drive and respond to reflection questions, and they could see the other students' responses and things like that. And our final product was slated to be somewhat similar, the research papers, but then we were also going to give presentations to our community partner virtually. In terms of documentaries and guest speakers, we changed up how we did the documentaries, and we went to a movie night format. We had them later in the semester We did them online. We all kind of watched these short documentaries together, and these led to some really, really great discussions. We had students from both classes getting together. And so we did use the Dirty Birds documentary again, but it was later in the semester, so it didn't really have the same effect as it did in the fall. And then we also watched this Right to Harm documentary about hog CAFOs. That was really, really good, and we just had a really great discussion about that. We were also able to put together a panel of speakers. We had Reverend Ledgerton and Jeff Curry come back, and then we added 2 people from the North Carolina Conservation Network, Will Hendrick and Sherry White Williamson. And they were awesome at talking to the students about some of the policy considerations with CAFOs, things that neither Tamara or I really had as much expertise in, but they were really focused in on this, and the students learned a lot from that panel discussion, which was awesome. And then after that semester, we decided that, that focus on policies and solutions was really the right move. It gave students more agency, and they felt like they were contributing to the solutions instead of just rehashing all of the problems, associated with these polluting industries. Unfortunately, the new community partner did not work out as well as we had hoped. They, I won't get into all the details, but basically they weren't able to deliver some of the things that they had promised us at the beginning of the semester. They also, it got to the point where they were trying to direct our classes and tell us what we should be talking about in our classes, which wasn't, it became less of a collaboration. So that was probably the most unfortunate thing that happened throughout this project. And our biggest struggle was still to bring the 2 classes together. But then we took a hiatus for a year, partially because of having to find a new community partner, but also because I was on maternity leave for a semester. So then we picked back up in the fall of 2022 with some other big changes. The biggest one being that the other really unfortunate thing was that Dr. Savage decided to leave UNCP. So I was determined to forge ahead because I really do see value in this project, in this type of project. So we got a new community partner. I began working with the Wynyard Rivers Alliance. They are a group, a watershed conservation group that works on monitoring water quality in 7 rivers in North and South Carolina, and they do some advocacy work. They do a lot of community events and things like that. So I thought this could be a really great new step for this project to work with them. I also was lucky in being able to find a new collaborator within UNCP, Dr. Matt Schneider from the Sociology and Criminal Justice Department. So I was able to keep this interdisciplinary part of the project, which was really great. And the new partner course is now his environmental sociology course. So it's a really great fit to work with these projects. And so our goals have shifted a little bit towards collecting data on water quality in the Lumber River because there are so many polluting industries in the watershed. We want to be able to spot problems if they arise. We want to be able to create sort of a baseline data set for this river that doesn't really exist that we know of. So we're working on that. We're also working to develop a volunteer water quality monitoring program for the whole river. Wynyard Rivers has done this successfully in the Waccamaw, and so we're trying to sort of create that program again here in the Lumber. And then from the sociology side, we're looking to explore some of the motivations and the knowledge of community volunteers in their established program. Sort of, what makes people want to volunteer for these conservation goals and with these organizations. And so to meet these new goals, I added a second course to this project, which is my freshwater ecosystems course. Again, it's a great fit, especially for the data collection angle. The students get experience using, sampling equipment, monitoring equipment. They have to put together presentations on the data they collect. And then we also did some sort of more traditional service activities like trash pickups along the river. We had 2 employees from Winyah Rivers who have been just awesome in this new transition, Emma Grotto and Kara Schildknecht. I can't say enough good things about them and their support of us in this new collaboration. So that was in the fall, and then in the spring, we tried to, reconnect to these classes with the sociology course interviewing the volunteers, and the biology course continuing data collection and trash pickups and things like that. My class also tried something new where we created infographics on the effects of different polluting industries in the watershed. One example is here. My students went with 5 facts about poultry CAFOs in the Lumber River. And so we've given these to Winyah Rivers Alliance to use sort of for their events. They also made little like postcard versions that could be handed out to people at different events and things like that. So that was really fun. The students were a little bit intimidated by it at first, but they did a good job with it. And then this picture is some of my students. And then this is Jeff Curry, the Lumber River Keeper in the front on the right. And clear in the back is Emma, one of the River Keeper assistant at Winyah Rivers. So this was one of our sampling trips that we took out with that class. We also had an environmental justice panel talking about these issues. Jeff was there, and Kara was there, and we also had Donna Chavis, who has done just tons and tons of work in Robeson County on environmental justice issues. It was great to hear her perspective as well. Okay, so where are we now with all of this? My class this fall is continuing to collect water quality data, and we are doing presentations for the Winyah Rivers Alliance on the 29th. And we are planning for the next time where both classes will be held. And we finally got both classes to meet at the same time 3 years later. And so we're really excited for all the possibilities that that will bring in terms of actually being able to get the students together more frequently, creating those connections between the natural and social sciences a little more strongly. And so we're still working on exactly what we want to focus on in the spring. Some of our current considerations are editing Wikipedia articles about the rivers that Winyah Rivers Alliance works on, because a lot of them don't have tons of detail. Diving more into the policy process. So getting students involved with things like community meetings or writing, letters to Congress people, or writing comments, during the open comment period for pieces of legislation. How does that work? What does that accomplish? Things like that. Of course, there's always more data to collect. We just, well, not we, but a local community member just discovered the presence of a new invasive species in the Lumber River that is very concerning, the apple snail. And so there's the potential there to develop, projects for both classes. And also we would love to expand the kind of more general service events for the broader campus community, things like trash pickups, potentially water testing events, things like that. So we have lots of possibilities. We're just trying to narrow down sort of where to go. Okay, so again, that was sort of all the twists and turns that we've encountered with this collaboration. But I sort of wanted to wrap this part up with talking about what has worked well, which has included the guest speakers. Guest speakers were always a big hit, with the students learned a lot from them. We learned a lot from them. And the way that we did this with having the classes meet at 2 different times is whichever class the guest speaker came to, we recorded it, and then the other class watched essentially the recording as an assignment if they couldn't come to the other class, which isn't as nice as being there in person, but they were still able to get the information. I also We also solicited questions from the students ahead of time for the guest speaker. So even if they weren't there physically, they could get their question answered by the guest speaker. Again, those movie nights, we offered them as extra credit because it's difficult to get students to be available for things outside of class, but they just worked really well. We had some really nice discussions about those topics, and students got really passionate about these issues, which was great to see. Also, I thought the peer review process and the peer reflection and sharing those files between classes, that also worked pretty well for especially when students needed to interact in an online space because of the pandemic. There was still a little bit of connection there. Also, in the last year, having more options for how students can be involved, the data collection, the trash pickup events, the interviews, it lets students kind of choose what aligns best with their interests in terms of the service. I put a question mark with field trips because the one that we were able to do went pretty well. But field trips are always a challenging aspect in a course like this, because even when you put them on the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, or something like that. So the other option is to have them during class time, but an hour and 15 minutes is not a lot of time to go anywhere and do something off campus. So that's something that we're still struggling with a little bit, but when we're able to do it, the students have really enjoyed it. Things that have not worked well thus far, again, really getting those students in the two classes really connected was tough because of the pandemic and because of the classes not being taught at the same time. Along those same lines, being able to create sort of high impact joint assignments that the two classes could both contribute to has been challenging. But these are both things that we are hoping to overcome next semester when we're actually having those classes at the same time. And then unfortunately, the website that we were hoping to create did not come to fruition with the student reports and all of that. Between my leave and Tamara leaving UNCP, that just kind of fell to the wayside. I'm hoping to bring it back, maybe still find a way to get that information out there. But it just hasn't happened yet, unfortunately. And then of course I put field trips here as well because of the reasons I just talked about. Sort of, they work, but they're hard to schedule. And then finally, if I had to give sort of this is my sort of bullet point summary of what I've learned so far in this process. I came into this project with a lot of enthusiasm, and I really think this is cool, and I think it's important to do to get students these multiple perspectives. But I didn't have a lot of experience in trying to do this, to bring these classes together. So here's what I've learned. Rule number one, just be flexible. And then my rule number two is no, seriously, just be really flexible because, things might change. Your community partner might change, or they may shift their goals. And then, part of service learning is working with the community partner, and so we want to make sure that we're meeting their goals as well as our own course goals. Also, be willing to experiment with different types of assignments and student projects, or other things. Some things will work really well, like our movie nights. Some things won't work really well, like getting the two classes together on a regular basis. And so I think anytime that you develop something new like this, there's just going to be a sort of a trying out period where there's a lot of trial and error going on. I've been really fortunate that my classes have been willing to just go on this ride, and the students have been really great about trying things out. And I'm very honest with them up front. You know, I say, I've never done this before. This is what we're going to try. And then I solicit a lot of feedback from them along the way as to what they have liked and what they haven't liked. And we've tried to adjust that. Also, um, use your network and build your network, both within the community and outside the community, because this is where, you know, you get guest speakers from. This is where you can develop opportunities for field trips, or, you know, potentially even things like internships or other experiences for students can come from these networks. So go meet people, you know, um, and have them introduce you to people they know, so that you can build those networks. Also, of course, remember that CCE is there for you. They've been super helpful for us in developing this project. The semester that the community partner didn't work out super well, they were very understanding and helpful. At the time, Sandy was still in charge of the service learning stuff, and he was really helpful with navigating that in a way that, you know, kind of, we were still able to move on with the class, but we didn't, you know, offend the community partner, and, you know, didn't burn any bridges and things like that. And then lastly, if you can get a student TA, they were super helpful with this. Not only just taking a little bit of the load in, you know, creating assignments or things like that, but students are sometimes more willing to talk to another student, right, than to a professor. So they will be told things that maybe your students don't want to tell you, but it can be really useful information.